Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the fifth episode of the State of the Division AL West edition. My name is T. Wright, alongside of my co-host, Kendall Mckee. Kendall, you are fresh off a trip to Dallas-Fort Worth area where you saw a game, little Rangers game action. Tell us how that was.
And it was awesome. Back in my hometown, seeing my favorite ball club and not getting a heat stroke at the game. What a blast that was. Yeah. seeing it. I went to Sunday night's game against Boston, or Sunday afternoon's game against Boston, which typically would have been a sunburn and a half. And it wasn't. And I saw tons of home runs and Adolis Garcia do some out of this world things. And it was a good time.
That's awesome. Yeah. Adolis, had a couple, did you say couple home runs?
Yeah, him and Cole Calhoun both hit 2 on the night when I was there.
Defensive players, yeah. Great game for you to see, for sure. Beat up on poor old Boston. No offense, Colby and Cam and about 7 other people. Just baseball.
We won't say that they lost the series, but they won the game. So
all right. So as we normally do, we'll start out with a look at the standings and kind of the changes in the standings over the past week. And then we'll go into Kendall's power rankings and some notes on the teams. We'll do offensive MVP, defensive MVP, which is actually a pitching MVP, a little LVP action, and then round it out with our card buy of the week. So standings, here we go. Last week, we had LA on top, followed by Houston, Seattle, Texas, and Oakland. We have a little switcheroo here. As of last night, Houston now sits atop the standings at 24-13. LA right behind them, 1 game back at 24-15. Texas, 16-19. Seattle, 16-21. Oakland, 16-23. Those teams are 7, 8, and 9 games back, respectively. Not a ton of movement, but just a little switch there. Houston and LA flipped the script, and Houston, after a pretty solid last 10 to 12 games, now find themselves 1 game up in the division. No one really had a terrible week, to be honest. Last week you had a couple rough weeks for Seattle and Oakland. I think they both went 1-6 on the week, but this week really wasn't that bad for anyone. Massive props to Reed Detmers. More on him a little bit later, but of course that no was splendid. It was taking place and finished right as we were wrapping up our show last week. So kind of unfortunate timing there, but we'll talk a little bit more about him later. Houston, big sweep over Minnesota this week, outscoring them 21-3, I believe. So that's interesting to me. I think what's even more interesting about that series is their bullpen went 9 2/3 in that series. So some thought that was kind of the weakest link in Houston. Yeah. But interesting to me to see them get a ton of work against a pretty good team and come away with a sweep. So Seattle took 2 of 3 from the Mets. That's an accomplishment. And Oakland took 4 of 5 from Detroit, which that's just too long really for anyone to be in Detroit. So props to them for making it for 5 games straight. But that's the division standings: Houston, LA, Texas, Seattle, Oakland. Kendall, give me a little bit more news and notes on these teams and talk about your power rankings.
Yeah, so last week I had the exact standings last week, and I made the caveat that the Astros were pushing to number 1 and the Mariners were pushing to number 4. One of those things happens in my power rankings this week. Yep. This week I switch it up actually because, and I have an argument against this, and right, most of it has to deal with Reed Detmers' no-hitter. Like, I think that was the only thing that kind of set it off. We were literally actively recording last week and Reed is throwing a no-hitter. And so I still have the Astros or the Angels at number 1 in the power rankings. But I think it's a 1A, 1B scenario. Like I'm telling you, another 7 days and the Astros could be easily number 1. But with the Angels doing what they're doing, having the guys that they have on their team, watching them doing what they're doing, I have them at number 1 still. But if they get swept tonight against the Rangers, that's a big series. That's a division rival getting swept against a team that's pushing. I think that's interesting and probably will drop them to number 2 next week if that happens. Now I do have, like I said, we got to give props to Reed. I think that was a super a super cool thing. Pete actually talked about it on Not Gambling Advice, where he was super all in on the Astros and he was fading Reed Detmers, and then Reed goes out and throws a no hitter, and Pete's like, "Wow, Pete obviously, Reed obviously loves justbaseball.com." So,
what a fun game to be at. Trout homers twice. You get to see a no. Everyone was clicking offensively.
Absolutely,
what a treat, man.
Yeah, and the Angels are a treat this year. I mean, they've been so bad for so long. You kind of just want them to be good. Even as a fan of like the division rivals, I want Trout to be able to, I want him to be able to have that, like I want him to have that. Yeah, and sure. Ohtani deserves it as well. And they've got a supporting cast that's out of this world right now. So, and we're going to talk about some of those things in a minute.
How could you not want to see both those guys healthy and playing at their fullest potential? It's so good for baseball.
And honestly, Rendon is an afterthought on this team, which is just blows my mind.
I know, right?
So, but Astros come in at number 2. They are made the number 1 jump to this in the standings. But I believe that they're pretty much neck and neck here. And at first we thought it was going to be a 3-team race in this division. It's clearly a 2-team race in this division.
Yeah.
The bottom 3 all have 16 wins. I mean, it's just, it's a struggle bus down there, but,
would you see a situation where Texas has a really hot stretch?
Yeah. And I think I'll just go ahead and say Texas actually moves into 3 this week for me. So, and because you asked that, I'll go ahead and jump to that and say that the Mariners, I said last week, if they have another week like they do and Texas has another week like they did, then they're going to flip flop. And they did. Texas didn't necessarily dominate the Red Sox like I thought they would, but on Sunday they proved that Martin Perez is still the guy. And I mean, that was a no hitter. They were literally getting no hit into the 5th inning and ended up winning 7-1, and so I mean, it's just, they just have like this presence. And like I said, Eli White and Jonah Heim couldn't do it all. You're seeing Adolis catch up. You're seeing Cole Calhoun hit the ball out of the park. He's got 4 home runs in the past 5 days or something like that. And then you're seeing Corey Seager is having a week. You gave him the LVP last week, and he said, "You know what, T, I'm listening to this," because obviously he is. And he said, I got to perform for my boys out there at Just Baseball and get off this LVP list. And he decided to play some good baseball. Now, if you could just call out Marcus Semien, please, because Marcus Semien really needs to start hitting the baseball. Like, I was watching him and Trevor Story together, and I knew in the offseason I created this narrative for myself. It's like, okay, which shortstops do you want as a free agent? Because we all knew that Texas was going to at least get 1, and then they ended up getting 2. But, it's like Corey or Marcus, Trevor, Carlos, all these. And then, but now it's like, you think Trevor is just having a horrible year, and Marcus Semien's numbers are actually worse. It's like, it's so bad. So for a guy that's such a good hitter, and he's hitting the ball really hard. His exit velocities are really good. His batting average against balls in play is just not. He will regret, or he will return to the mean.
Yeah, he'll yeah.
So I do think we will see a massive hot stretch from these hitters. And I think, it might be a couple more games here, but I think we're seeing it. If they win tonight, that's 4 in a row. Corey Seager's coming around. You've already got the supporting cast playing well.
Yeah. Where are we at in the wild card race? I know it's super early, but I'm just wondering, like, what does Texas have to do to get into that conversation?
I think they are going to be a distant thought in that conversation. No matter what, because of the guys that they've recruited in the offseason. I think if anybody's recovering that wild card race, you're looking at the Central and you're saying, okay, there's pretty much one team that's going to come out of the Central. But you're looking at that AL East, and that's a scary division. Like, the Yankees are the best team in baseball, but you've got Tampa and Toronto there. Like, they're probably going to get 2 of those wild card spots, which leaves probably the White Sox and the Angels. And I just don't know if Texas can step up into that. I don't know if they can step up into that wild card conversation, but they're going to be close.
It looks like it's Angels, Tampa, and Toronto right now. Again, still early, but Texas sits about 3 games outside of that.
Yeah, and I don't think they're better than the White Sox, to be honest.
Yeah, no.
But it's going to be encouraging enough to really propel them into next season when a lot of their prospects are going to be ready in 2023. You got Cole Winn, Jack Leiter, a bunch of those guys. And I don't want to make this an only Texas Rangers show, but I think it's really positive right now. And so I'm going to put them in 3, which has me going to the Mariners. Such a disappointment to start the season. And like I've said, I think a lot of that plays into Mitch Haniger not being on the field. I'm going to continue to say that. I think he is he's the leader on the team, I think, and you've got that DNA that needs to be fostered, and Julio Rodriguez is definitely holding his own, but that's about it. They don't have a whole lot going on, and they're really struggling, and having a guy like Kelenic not be able to figure it out and having to be going back into the minor leagues, maybe he's just Lewis Brinson, which is really unfortunate because everybody was so high on him. So, but I want to also point out that Lewis Brinson was a top 5 prospect in baseball at one time too. And so we can't ignore the fact that these guys don't always pan out to be, Mike Trout or whatever. So
sure.
I think Jack pointed out a fun thing in our group chat in terms of the Mariners for Arias coming from the Twins potentially to the Mariners and solidifying another veteran position. I do think that would help them a lot. I think they have the chance to still be there. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in the what's to come, but I'll just go ahead and say it. They're at a 14.2% chance to make the postseason right now. Yeah. That's really bad considering I was pulling for them to win the division this year. So obviously we've seen better turnarounds than the Mariners. They've got 16 wins and they've got 21 losses. That's not that far from 500 baseball.
Yeah, it's not terrible.
But when we look at the product they're putting on the field, it's not great. But Robbie Ray's not playing well. Gilbert's there. They've got some good pieces, but I think they need some veteran leadership to step up. And I think the trade deadline will probably help that. And I think I could see a situation. I said Texas is probably not better than the White Sox. I could see a situation where the Mariners end up in that final wild card spot because of the absolute gusto they have on their team. So
sure. Yeah. All right. So let's review your power rankings real quick. Go back through.
Oh, sorry. I totally missed the bottom of the barrel in the Oakland A's.
No need.
We've got the Angels, the Astros, Texas, Mariners, and then the A's. Okay. And if I can say one positive thing about the A's, I know we're going to dog them for all year, but Sheldon Neuse he's the real deal. And I did a little bit of a deep dive on him, and you see a guy that goes from Oakland, and he comes in the same Oakland trade as Jesus Luzardo. So he gets from the Nationals. So that's a big deal. He was a big part of that trade. Then he gets shipped off to the Dodgers in a very small trade, a very small trade. And then he comes back when they cut him, and Oakland brings him back, and then he gets into the starting lineup here in Oakland, and the guy's hitting. He's got an under 30K percentage, and he's playing really well. His numbers are really nice. He's got a 125 WRC plus, 281, 2 home runs. He's got a 0.8 WAR. This guy's not bad.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty excited about him. I do happen to we grew up in the same city, and he came from the rival high school that I did, and that's kind of unique. The Rangers did draft him right side of high school, and he ends up going to OU instead and then gets drafted. But kind of just a neat story. I like him a lot. So if there's anything in the A's system that I can point to, it's that he's getting the chance to be a big leaguer. And also, the last thing I wanted to say about this is if you put their win percentage in the East, they would be in 4th. So
there you go.
The Red Sox and the Orioles and the Angels, the Athletics are all very similar makeups right now, which should say a lot about that AL East bottom half.
Well, there you go. That's something to look forward to. All right. Good deal. Okay, so let's move on to MVP, LVP discussion. We'll start with our offensive MVP and our offensive LVP. Then we'll move to our pitching MVP and pitching LVP. So there are actually quite a few guys who had pretty strong offensive weeks. Alvarez, Tucker, Taylor Ward, Cole Calhoun, Altuve.
It's a good week for the West.
Yeah, really good week for the West. Everybody had, like I kind of said at the beginning when we talked about standings, no team had a really bad week. And so there are a lot of guys that put up some really strong offensive performances. But I'm going to go with, I don't know if it's a bit of surprise. It may not be a bit of surprise if you're watching every single game. But my offensive MVP of the week is Yuli Gurriel. So here's why. First, his slash line was impressive. 440, 444, 800. He had a WRC plus of 285. He hit in 5 of 6 games. He had 4 multi-hit games, 3 home runs, 2 doubles, 7 runs scored, and 27 plate appearances. And so, but he only struck out 1 time the entire week. So I know that Jordan had a massive week. Jordan had maybe like 1 more home run, 1 more RBI. Ward had a great week. Ward is just a freaking machine. Calhoun had a big week. I don't want to take away from their efforts, but I'm just a sucker, admittedly, for a guy that doesn't strike out. And so, but his offensive numbers were fantastic around that. It wasn't like he just put the ball in play. I mean, he had a phenomenal week. 4 multi-hit games, 3 home runs. Again, like I said, 7 runs scored. Struck out once. So I'm going to give it to Yuli Gurriel. But again, don't want to discount. There were a lot of guys. And you probably screaming at me for not picking Jordan Alvarez in this situation.
I'm not screaming at you.
At the same time, I just think I love a guy that gets out there. Not only did he hit for power, but 1 strikeout and 27 plate appearances is something to be applauded. So props to him. He gets our offensive MVP. Our offensive LVP goes to Tony Kemp. Guy that you probably don't even think about very much.
Tony Stark? No.
He had 35 plate appearances. He had the second most plate appearances in the American League this past week. He started every single game at second base for the A's. He recorded 4 hits in those 35 plate appearances. His slash line was 143, 265, 179. He had a WRC plus of 47. He didn't strike out a whole lot, so I appreciate that, but just a pretty pathetic offensive week from him. So who, for a guy, again, that had the second most plate appearances in the entire American League. So Tony Kemp, if you're listening, which we know you are our offensive LVP. Seager listened last week. Seager turned it on. Tony, if you're getting 35 plate appearances this week, you need to step it up. So defensively,
typically every week our LVPs have come around and have a better week. So obviously
Seager responded.
Everyone listens to our show, T.
Yeah, which is great, and we appreciate it. Thank you. Defensively, or again, in our case, pitching MVP, you can't go with anyone other than Detmers, even though he kind of was at the tail end of our week. We didn't get to, but
and he pitched again and didn't do well.
Yeah, but I mean, the guy. I mean, he threw a no-hitter. So
yeah, I mean that's significant.
We can't snub that. And then we didn't get to talk about last week.
If there's a no-hitter in our division, it's got to be the MVP pitcher of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. So got to give the man his props. Great performance against very likely, as we've already mentioned, a playoff team in Tampa Bay. No offensive slouch there. Not the best offensive in the league, in the American League, probably, middle of the pack there, but still playoff contender Tampa Bay. No hitter, got to give it to him. Pitching LVP, I don't know. Urquidy for Houston. He pitched last night. He pitched on the 11th. On the 11th, I think he only went 3 innings. Didn't really pitch that bad. And then they let him go 5 innings last night. He gave up 12 hits, 2 home runs, I think 4 earned runs. He only struck out 1. And it was against Boston nonetheless. So not nearly as bad as Eovaldi's performance when he gave up 5 home runs in 1 inning, which was just phenomenal to watch.
That saved one of my fantasy weeks, by the way.
Tucker's performance last night was pretty phenomenal. I think he had like 24 points. So
good grief,
which was fantastic. Just keep going, Tucker. I need you to get your card values up.
Big Tuck, baby.
So anyway, that's my pitching LVP. That's my pitching MVP, offensive LVP, and offensive MVP. So moving on, any quick thoughts on that in general, Kendall? Did you have anybody that you're like, no, that's just preposterous. This guy has to be your LVP or MVP.
No, I think that you did a good job by giving Corey a little bit of credit from coming around since last week. And I just wanted to point out that since this is something I bring up every time, Sam Huff is having a nice spread line of 4-4-4, 4-4-4, 4-4-4. And he's got a 170 WRC plus with a 666 batting average against balls in play, which is obviously going to come down. So, but I do like my guy, Sam Huff.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap up this show by our favorite little segment, Card Buy of the Week. We're actually both in agreement here. It's got to be.
This is a no-brainer, T.
Taylor Ward.
Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about Taylor's prices. We got a couple minutes left. We'll end it, and we'll see you guys next week.
Taylor's a guy that almost got little to no credit coming through the minor league system. Came up, like we said, we've talked about in previous episode, came up as a catcher, tried to play third. They put him in left. They just keep moving him further out. This guy now plays first base. Last night, Matt Duffy gets hurt on a collision at first. He comes in and plays first base the rest of the game. But this guy's offensive profile is off the charts this year. Yeah. Aram was texting us in the group chat today, and he's like, Ward could legitimately have a case for MVP. And I said, okay, let's back up a little bit there. He's got two guys on his team that really do have a case for MVP. I don't know if I'm ready to say that you've got three guys on one team that are capable of being an MVP when they're second in their division, but I will say at Ward's prices, the Bowman Chrome Auto, the last four sold have been 44, 45, 50, and 95. So if we're looking at that at all, obviously his prices are skyrocketing. You might be able to still dip into that 40 to 90 range. If you can get anywhere between 40 and 90 in that for that Bowman Chrome based auto, definitely go buy it. It's gonna skyrocket in value.
Awesome. Yep, I agree. Taylor Ward is our card buy of the week. Go try to pick one up, $75 or under, something around there, you're gold. So, and watch that thing hopefully appreciate in value over the course of the year if he can maintain this level of offensive performance. That'll do it for our 5th episode of State of the Division, AL West edition. Leave us some comments, leave us some feedback, leave us some players you want us to talk about. Maybe we can tackle it next episode. Thank you guys for listening. I'm T. Wright with Kendall Mckee. We will see you guys next week.
Adios.